the subject matter expert. All right, so this is where we've got Deb and Marcy, right? A technical data steward or a functional data steward. We're going to come back and talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail, but start off with this, the subject matter experts type of steward role. These people have an active task in doing data governance in terms of authoring or answering questions or reviewing. Again, we'll come back on that, but that's the one primary type, one type of stewardship role is a subject matter expert. Next, you have an accountability role. So this is like lead the team. She's a business unit lead. So she's not a person who is necessarily ever going to get asked to write a definition or to deal with a data quality issue, but she might be the person who says, who is the person in your unit that is that subject matter expert that we should talk to, you know, or the person who is ultimately responsible for making sure that things are fully staffed and executed in the area, even though she may not be doing it herself. Next is like a gatekeeper owner type role. There is a sort of a Venn diagram here where there's crossover between, you know, someone could have actually more than one of these types of roles, but there are definitely people, particularly when you talk about data system owners or tool owners or other things, who are going to be basically making decisions about whether or not people can connect to their systems, whether or not they're going to share their information for their systems with the overall group, and particularly upfront, like getting these type of stewards involved early is good. And then moving forward, they'll have sort of operational roles on granting access and policy. The next is sort of a support triage role. So this is a type of data steward role that doesn't necessarily need to be the subject matter expert, but is dealing with requests and tasks and finding the right experts and executing on that. And again, that could be also done by a subject matter expert, but if you don't necessarily have a subject matter expert, you can have a support or triage role that's going to field stuff and go find the right people, and you don't have a staff steward. All right, so let's go in a little bit more detail on some of these. So let's talk about the subject matter expert. So it could be functional, it could be technical, it could be sort of policy expertise, it could be other types of expertise. Their purpose would be to author content, you know, to write business glossary definitions, to create report specifications, to curate a report, to research and resolve a data quality issue, to write a data quality, well, you name that. Or maybe they're taking something that someone else has written and they're going to review and approve or reject the content. So you can, you know, sort of a second tier level of authoring. Curation might be to take something that exists or has been authored and add some other supplemental information, like, you know, defining the usability of a report or the quality of a report, or the adding sort of policy information around it, or clarifying like what's the purpose of this, or that type of information. Maybe they're an assignee or creator, like a report writer or something, that they're creating content around things, because one sort of, let's say you have a report request that comes in, someone says, hey, I need a new report developed, and you assign that to a report writer. They might work with the requester to come up with, you know, good requirements and documentation and specification for what that report is going to be, and then they'll turn that into good documentation of the report once it's done and complete. So they're creating a bunch of content and serving as that subject matter expert. Maybe they're going to pull other resources in to help them if they're creating stuff. Or maybe they're doing operational tasks, like you have a request coming in to, you know, to run a report or to grant access to someone, and they'll, you know, they've got expertise to execute that task related to, you know, running some report or granting access or doing something to make that work. So those are the kind of important tasks. And you can probably think of some other granular types of tasks that you do there. But the point here is that this is the, you know, meat and potatoes of your data governance operation. These are the people who, when you talk about data intelligence, you know, intelligence around your data, that intelligence is coming primarily from these people creating that content, you know, like curation or reviewing and improving and validating that content and managing requests. The accountability role is one that you probably could tell when you hear me talk about this, is one that I don't think is nearly as important, but it's one that people often have as part of their goals. Like, who is the ultimate person responsible for the data in this area? So maybe you have a human resources data trustee or data owner or data, steward, who's, if you were to define the purpose, is to say, like, it's their responsibility at the end of the day to make sure that all the data is accurate and that any types of governance needs are managed. Not that they would do it themselves, but they would ensure that there are people available to do that and times set aside for that. And I often think about that as you might hear about a CEO or a president of some organization or chairman of the board or something that has to sign off on financial statements for their company that they're accurate. Now, they didn't prepare that financial statement themselves. Ideally they read it or made sure that the people who did prepare it are trustworthy and competent and were available, right? But they're ultimately responsible. So that's that buck stops here rule. And that they're sort of assigning the subject matter experts and creating those roles. Now, the problem that I see a lot of people do is that they create their data steward roles, and they'll say we've got our data governance committee, and we've got our data stewards assigned, and our data steward over human resources is our VP of HR, and our data steward over sales is our VP of sales. And I'm immediately thinking, you can't actually be expecting those people to be serving as the content creators, the subject matter experts, the doing the work of that job. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't get pulled in as subject matter experts, but oftentimes it's impractical to assign those roles that accountability. They create the accountability role and forget that there needs to be a do the work role, right? And what ends up happening, this is where they get the lack of buy-in. Like, you get, you start off and you start saying, hey, we need a bunch of definitions written. We need to research this data quality issue. We need to update policy attributes on label whatever the PII fields are in this particular data system. And those activities, if you only have an accountability role, or a role that maybe you don't really understand that you've created, and you've put a person in it that couldn't possibly do more than just be accountable, right? Then you have a problem. So you just need to be very clear to say, like, and sometimes it is helpful to have two different roles. But if you don't have an accountability, if all you have is like that active role, that's fine. You just still need someone who is going to be sure to assign the right people in those roles, and that may be done by your oversight governance team. But so I think it's good to have both, but just be clear that this role, this accountability role, is what it is, and it can't be the only thing that you have. And if you had to lose one, lose the accountability role and keep the subject matter experts if you can. All right, the gatekeeper owner is important. Now, this often can be the subject matter. It can be the same person, but the point of this is that if you don't know and have identified the people who are going to be making the decision on whether or not people, the governance process itself is allowed access for metadata or whatever to their tool. Like, oh, if the first goal is to document this data system from a data model perspective, and to inventory all the reports, and you've got this Oracle database and these, let's say, Tableau reports that are developed, and you haven't identified or included the person or group of people who have the authority to tell you, yes, you can connect to the system and document the metadata. You can pull in the information from this reporting tool or this whatever to document that. And I understand why you're doing it, and it's great, and I support it. If you don't have those people involved, you're in trouble. So you need to get those gatekeepers and owners in. So I really think it's actually useful to explicitly define data system owners, and tool owners, so that you know that you can route both overall project access and buy-in requests to them, as well as ongoing operational access requests. You know, people was like, oh, you know, I'm a new employee and I need to have it, so maybe that gets routed to them too, or maybe they have a certain accountability role for that, but still, it's a specific thing being able to grant that access. They may also be doing things like setting standards and policies for how people can access their system, or managing vendor relations around those systems, or understanding, in some ways, subject matter expertise, or how to train people on that. So again, there's no reason that John admin here can't be both a defined named data steward role called the, you know, payroll data system owner, and also be the payroll technical data steward. Those are, you know, and if you have those two roles, it's clear like what the purpose of those two things are. But if you don't have a separate kind of owner role, it can get murky, because you could have a person who is a subject matter expert but actually doesn't have any authority over making a decision about whether or not people can access it, right? And so you need to include that person. So think about a gatekeeper owner for things like data systems and tools. Maybe there's other pieces of your data environment that makes sense to include, but those are the two I usually think of. All right, and then we talked about support and triage roles. So as you'll see in a minute, when you start talking about how you engage data stewards and how things flow through a process of getting people to author content or review content or to answer requests or deal with issues, you don't always have a defined specific role for the area or the system or the tool or whatever that you need to go to. Or you may have people who have that role but aren't typically engaged. So having someone or having a role that can essentially facilitate and hold the hand of these requests and things through a process to make sure that things can get routed to them. They can take and say, right, if we don't have an explicitly bought in and engaged subject matter expert or data steward here, let's I can take this request and shepherd that to find the right person to answer that question and serve kind of as proxy data steward or proxy SME while I find someone else. And this is a super critical thing to do. Also, is that you are guaranteed to have holes in your stewardship support, either like not having people or having people that are not engaged. And if you don't have engaged people or people are defined roles and there are questions or issues that come up that need to involve those roles, having a default proxy support person to go to is absolutely critical. And then they can own it and go find that. Otherwise, it's just going to get stuck, waiting for, no one will own solving that problem, right? This role, this support or triage role, can work with that accountability owner, like the lead a team to say, hey, who's the right person that I should get on this? There is a bonus role, which is just a general oversight role, right? So this is what I was talking about, the overall DG champion, right? The data governance champion, the group that's trying to implement this. They can serve that support oversight position that we just talked about, but they have other things to do, making sure that depending on sort of the phase of the project. And we have a whole separate session we're going to do on this, like oversight. But at the beginning, they're doing things like setting the priorities and getting buy-in and helping to define the roles and workflows and getting stewards in those roles and working with the groups to do that. When you're implementing, they're going to help get initial content created and train stewards and review new stewards' content and serve as acting stewards when needed. So stepping into roles where they don't exist. And then ongoing, once you kind of get up and running, even in certain areas, even if you're iterating on that, monitoring requests and activities, just making sure nothing's getting stuck, and stepping in to act if needed, resolving collisions and escalations and dealing with that, being the champion and helping to continue to promote the use, and then dealing with administrative tasks, and then helping to expand the scope. So, but the point of this is that this is a critical role, absolutely critical role in data governance, is this data governance oversight and making sure that all those other stewards clearly understand what they're doing and are well trained and are supported in what they need to do. And as I just said before, I can't stress this enough, stepping in to serve as acting stewards when needed, and recruiting and finding the appropriate subject matter expert who maybe isn't engaged or assigned to that role to get to take that tasks.